Hey friend, before we get started, I want to talk to you about something really quick. Let me ask you this. Do you ever look at your calendar and you think to yourself, oh my gosh, I have absolutely no idea how I'm going to make this happen, right? The calendar is so full. There's absolutely no room on your plate. And what is the very first thing that gets put on the back burner? Our time with God. Right? If this is you and you're thinking, yes, I need some daily practices, easy, simple daily practices that are going to keep me connected to God, then I've got you, my friend. Next week, I'm hosting my brand new workshop, Anchored Faith. You'll learn the practical steps that you need to maintain a deep and meaningful relationship with God, giving you that peace and security no matter how busy life gets. And I'm also going to talk in there what you can do during the upcoming holidays to stay connected to the very reason for the season, right? Jesus. So my friend, I'm only offering this one time. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to pause this right now, hop on over to footprintsofinspiration.com/workshop and get registered today. I can't wait to show up and serve you inside this workshop and help you truly put into practice those steps that are going to get you closer to God. So again, hop on over to footprintsofinspiration.com/workshop. Welcome to a Faithful God podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Rotzel, and today on the show, we're going to start a 4-part series on humility and why it's so important to God. So grab those earbuds and your favorite beverage and join me for today's show. Well, hey friend, happy Friday. Welcome back to the show. I hope you've had a great week. Listen, this week we are starting a 4-part series on humility. We're going to actually spend this week talking about why it's so important to God. And then over the next several weeks, we're actually going to dig into the Bible and uncover some stories of humility. Just some people in the Bible that we can see how they demonstrated humility in their lives. So I'm excited to do this. I love doing series like this. If you love series as well, I just actually recently we did another 4-part series on faith. So when you're done, you certainly don't have to have listened to that episode in order to get started with this one. But if you like these types of episodes where we do series, you're going to love that series. It's over in episode number 134. One of the things you can do is anytime I put out an episode, it's footprintsofinspiration.com/ and then the episode number. So it would be footprintsofinspiration.com/134. So again, you don't need to have listened to that before you listen to this series, but I do. It's another one that I got a lot of good feedback on and everyone really enjoyed. So listen, let's just be honest with each other. Humility is hard. There is so much humility as when we are learning to walk close to God, when we are learning to apply these lessons in our lives, there's so much humility. In fact, I'm going to get a little vulnerable with you after a bit and share with you just my own story in humility and how I've really had to walk that out this year, this past actually couple years. So I'll share that with you in just a little bit. But in today's show, we're going to uncover what humility is and probably more importantly, what it isn't. Well, we're going to talk about why it's so important to God, how humility impacts our lives, and how we can practice having a spirit of humility. So what does humility mean? It means having or showing a modest or low estimate of one's own importance. It's the quality of being free from pride and arrogance. Here's the thing. Here's what I really want you to understand is humility is not a sign of weakness. In fact, to be perfectly honest with you, it's a sign of strength. It requires inner security. It requires self-awareness. It requires the ability to put others over ourselves, not ourselves first. It requires, us to put others over ourselves, right? And it's also a very, it's a sign, of a very strong character. So there's when we're talking about humility, that has nothing to do with weakness. In fact, it's quite the opposite, because let's face it, we really have to, be strong within ourselves. We have to be strong in our faith. We have to be strong in just in our ability to lay down our own desires, our own wishes, our own needs for the sake of someone else. So in the Bible, humility is seen as a deep reverence for God and a recognition of our dependence on Him. It involves acknowledging our limitations and need for God's guidance. It involves allowing recognizing and acknowledging that, God, we don't have all the answers. That we even from our limited perspective, we think we've got the answers. We think we know how things should be, right? Everything should be like this. But the truth is, we've got to be able to take a step back. We, as Christians, we have to learn how to take a step back, seek God's guidance in it, and act accordingly. Right? And I'm going to get into that and as far as how we respond to things in just a little bit. So humility in the Bible is demonstrated by our willingness to walk in obedience, to lay down our desires and follow where God is calling us. It's demonstrated in through us serving others, right? Just like Jesus did, right? Just like Jesus did. And it's also demonstrated by putting others' needs before our own. This isn't easy. We live in a world right now, in a culture where it's all about me, me, me. Go after what I want. Put myself first. I need to put myself up here, and I need to take care of me and do all those things. And it's really, this completely contradicts our culture right now. It completely contradicts what the world is telling us to do. But when we are humble at heart, when we choose to obey God, to follow where He's calling us, to serve others, when we choose to put others' needs above our own, we're walking and living like Jesus did, right? We're actually doing the exact same things that Jesus did. And when we choose to have a humble heart, what happens is, as we choose to follow God, as we choose to lay down our desires, as we choose to serve others, God starts to align our hearts with His will for our lives. We may have this one thinking, we look at things of, this is how I want it to be. These are my desires. But when we start with a heart of humility, and when we start nurturing or fostering a humble heart, what happens is, in the process, God takes and He aligns our hearts with our hearts and our wills with His will for our lives. Now, I told you at the beginning of the show that I was going to share my own vulnerability and humility. Actually, back in episode number 122, I shared my own journey. I got vulnerable with you. I shared my own journey through forgiveness and just how hard and painful and the reality of walking in forgiveness. Now, we're to be humble at heart in everything we do. But I just want to give you a little bit of an example. I've lost count how many times I've said to my counselor, because I am in counseling for this, I'm just really trying to work through forgiveness in this one particular area and with this one particular person in my life. And it's hard, it's painful, and there's so much humility in forgiveness. I have no idea how many times I've said to my counselor, oh my goodness, like, this is hard. I had no idea there was so much humility in forgiveness, in that journey of healing, in that journey of letting go of the bitterness, the anger, the what should be done, right? Letting go of that long list of all the hurts and why I deserve to feel the way I do, right? Man, oh man, there's so much humility in that. And this isn't easy. Having a humble heart, God, it takes perseverance. It takes understanding the realities of living in this world and trying to live for God, right? We want to try to not live in this world, but instead live for God. And it requires so much humility on our part. It requires laying down what we want. It requires a surrendered spirit. We have to get to the end of ourselves and say, I cry uncle, right? I give up, Lord. I surrender. You know what I want. This is what I want. This is where we have to say to ourselves, or we have to say to God, all right, Lord, these are my desires, but this is what I want for you, but I want your will in my life. Just as Jesus, I've been talking a lot about this lately in Confident Prayer Warrior with my students and such, but in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus, who was about to be crucified, who was about to go through this unimaginable pain and torture, and here he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's praying, and he says, Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. You see, it's not wrong to ask God for these things. It's not wrong to have these desires, these wants, these needs. But what we have to do is what I like to teach, or what I teach my students, we have to make that 1% shift in the way that we pray. Yes, we take our requests to the Lord. Yes, we let God know what we want, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But what we have to do is desire God's will over our own will. That's humility. That's laying down. That's surrendering our desires for his. And this is what Jesus says. He says, Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done over mine. Right? We have to do that same thing if we want to apply these lessons in our life, if we want to feel more connected to God, if we want to experience that growth and transformation in our lives. We have to be humble. We have to surrender what we want for God's desires in our lives. And it is not easy, my friends. I am right here with you. You know, I don't teach from a pulpit. I teach right from the trenches with you. This is not easy. Humility is hard. But here's the thing. All the easy stuff, like growth and transformation, don't happen in the easy. They don't happen when everything's going your way. No, true growth and transformation happen outside of our comfort zone. They happen in the deep waters. If we're just constantly sitting right here and we're all we're doing is going to God with this long list of things that we want, right? And again, it's not bad to do that. I want to be very clear about that. But if that's all we're doing, we're in the shallow waters. We're praying those surface prayers. If we want to experience real growth and transformation, we have to humble ourselves. We have to have a spirit of humility. We have to surrender what we want for God's desires in our lives. We've got to go into the deep waters with God. Is it easy? No, but I can promise you this. I can promise you, as sure as I'm standing here, when you take that leap of faith, right? When you choose to go into the deep waters, when you choose to humble yourself, and surrender what you want for God's will, when you choose to humble yourself before the Lord, that's when your life is going to change. That's when you're going to send me a DM or an email at Tammy@footprintsofinspiration.com, and you're going to say, you know what, Tammy, you're so right. I was scared out of my mind. It was so hard. I didn't want to give up what I wanted. But when I let go, when I surrendered, when I chose to be humble before the Lord, that's when everything changed. And you're going to send me an email or a DM and tell me that. And I'm going to sit here and I'm going to celebrate with you, my friend, because it is powerful and it's life-changing when you learn to foster a spirit of humility. So if we're going to talk about what humility is, we really need to also talk about what it isn't, right? We've really got to understand that. This is not about criticizing yourself or putting yourself down. It's not allowing others to take advantage of you. That's not what humility is. Humility is about striving to put God and his commands first and foremost in our life, even if that means setting aside, even if, especially when it means setting aside our own desires, pride, or personal ambitions to follow his will. This is about laying it all out there, about surrendering, right? A lot of you know my story. For years, I laid in my bed with migraines and cried out to God. I was mad at God. I turned my back on God. I was so angry that he had allowed everything to be taken away from me. And I thought that the only way my life could change was to completely heal from those migraines, to never have another migraine again. I thought the only way that anything would change in my life was for it to be the way I wanted it to be. I wanted my social life back. I wanted to go to every one of my kids' activities, all those activities that I was missing. I wanted to be at a job that I absolutely loved. And this was what I want, right? But you see, I didn't make that shift. It took me getting to rock bottom for God to kind of shake me there and say, whoa. When are you going to surrender to me? When are you going to trust me with your life? When are you going to have faith that I have something so much better for you? And it was when I finally humbled myself, when I finally surrendered and said, all right, God, I am at the end of myself, right? That whole saying, you don't know God is all you need until God is all you have, right? And you don't learn that. You do not learn that until you hit rock bottom, until you are just miserable in life and you feel like there's nothing left. But you see, when we get to the end of ourselves, when we choose to lay down what we want for God's desires, when we cry uncle and surrender it all to him, that is when things start to change. That's when nothing changes and yet everything changes. I was still laying in that bed for a couple of years, but everything had changed. I could see now that God had so much more planned for me. I could see now that being in the four walls of my home didn't mean my life was over. Now I'm reaching women all over the world instead of just in my community from that dental office. You see, we have to humble ourselves. We have to humble what we want. It's not about allowing others to take advantage of us. It's not about putting ourselves down. It's not about thinking less of ourselves, but thinking of ourselves less. Did you catch that? Humility is not about thinking less of ourselves. It's about thinking of ourselves less. It's about putting God's desires before our own desires. You see, when we foster a spirit of humility, it's important to God. God uses this time to align our desires, as I just mentioned, our desires with his desires. It teaches us how to submit to him and love others selflessly. That's what humility is. Humility highlights that it's not just a virtue. It's not just a virtue, but a critical foundation for spiritual growth. This is how we grow. It enables us to develop a deeper, more authentic, deeper connection with God, a more meaningful connection with God. And by embracing humility, we open ourselves to God's guidance and transform our hearts so that we're better able to reflect his character. You see, what does it go back to? If you've been following me for any length of time, you know I talk about this all the time. It all goes back to the foundation of our Christian faith. Why were we created? We were created for one reason and one reason only, to make God known, and bring him glory. And when we learn to humble ourselves before the Lord, when we learn to lay down our desires for his, that's when we're able to more fully love others selflessly, right? It's when we're allowed, or when we cry uncle, surrender what we want, and we start to walk in obedience and follow God's plan for our life. And most importantly, by doing all of these things, by learning to foster a spirit of humility, that's when God and his glory start to shine through us. That's when people's lives start to change, because we allow we start living for God instead of living for ourselves. So how can humility change our lives? When we have a spirit of humility, it fosters and positively impacts the relationships in our lives. It gives us the ability for better leadership skills. And it helps us experience that true inner peace, right? Not peace that's dependent on our circumstances, but that true inner peace that comes only from following God. By adopting an attitude of humility, a humble attitude, we become better listeners. We become better listeners because we're more willing to just sit and listen in the moment with someone. We're more empathetic, right? We feel them more deeply, the hurts that others are going through. The other thing that it does is it makes our interactions with others stronger, obviously, because we become better listeners. We become more empathetic. So our relationships become stronger when we develop an attitude of humility. It also changes the way we see the world. Excuse me. It changes the way we see the world, because when we develop this heart of humility, when we're striving and allowing God to align our desires with his, we see the world differently. We see the world the way God sees the world, right? Because from our perspective, the world is a hot mess. But when we allow God to shine through us, when we humble ourselves and take on that humble attitude, that's when we start to see things differently in our lives. And this is when we get to experience those things that helps us walk it out and walk out our purpose. Just, better, right? We're going to walk that purpose out, our purpose to make God known and bring him glory. Jesus gave us a great commission to make disciples of all the nations. And when we do that, when we take on that servant's heart, we humble ourselves and take on that servant's heart, which, by the way, we're going to talk about in an upcoming episode in this series. But that's when we start to make a difference in the lives of those around us. We all want to feel fulfilled, right? We all want to know that we're making a difference in the lives of others. We all want purpose, right? God created us to desire a purpose, to desire fulfillment. But the problem is what happens is we tend to go along with the culture, with the world. We tend to look for all those things, our purpose and fulfillment, in all the things, all the material things, all the things that we can attain and achieve in this life. That's not what God intended when he created us. He intended for us to experience true fulfillment, true peace in him, not in this world. And it all begins with a humble heart. So how can you practice an attitude of humility? How can you foster a true humble attitude and heart? First and foremost, you know what I'm going to say. You make that ask. You go to God and you say, Lord, help me to have a humble heart. Search me, right? Search my heart, Lord, and reveal to me any areas where I am still not surrendering to you. That's the first place you do. Always, the first place should always be that you go to God first and foremost and make that ask. Remember, God didn't, he doesn't expect us to go through life on our own. He doesn't expect us to foster a humble heart in this crazy world that is so full of let's, get what we want, go after success and all the material things. He doesn't expect us to do that on our own. He wants us to make that ask. He wants us to come to him for that, to rely on him for the strength and the wisdom and the guidance and the clarity to make that happen, to change our heart. And then we ask him, Lord, change my heart, right? One of the most effective prayers that you can ever pray is change me, Lord. I've got a podcast episode that I'll drop in the show notes for you that's all about the 7 most effective prayers you can ever pray. And one of them is change me, Lord. If you need to develop, to strive to, I'm kind of at a loss for words here, but we go to God and we make that ask and we say, change me, Lord, right? One of the most effective prayers we'll ever pray, because when we ask for him to change our hearts, he's going to give us a humble heart. He's going to nurture that. He's going to align our thoughts with his will. The next thing you want to do is take a good, hard look within. I told you my story. I shared my story with you on forgiveness and how humbling forgiveness is and how difficult it's been. That takes a lot of self-reflection. These are bold prayers. These are bold things that you're doing. We're not treading water we're not sitting in the shallow end anymore of our Christian faith. When we start striving to have a humble heart, when we work, right? This isn't about perfection, my friend. This is about just striving to do better today than we did yesterday, about going to God and asking him for that help. And this is going to require a lot of self-reflection. It is not easy. It is humbling. It is tough. But if we're truly going to step into the deep waters, if we're truly going to grow closer to God and experience that growth and transformation we're looking for, we have to take a good, honest look within. We've got to take a good, honest look within. The other thing we have to do when it comes to a humble spirit is we have to think before we respond. I've been talking about this a lot lately, and just in my courses, my programs and stuff, and other things, just talking about the opening ceremonies for the Olympics. That was a true, so if you don't know, I'm sure you do by now, but the opening ceremonies, they had some drag queens come out and depict the Last Supper there. And, as Christians, that was that to us, that, I mean, they mocked something very, very sacred to us. But as Christians, we have to respond. It matters the way we respond. If we're responding in ways that are ugly, that's not showcasing Jesus. That's not allowing God's light to shine. What allowed God's light to shine, who really shined for Jesus in that moment, were all those Christians who came together in Paris, and they weren't out there protesting and spewing ugly things. They were out there praising and worshiping God. They humbled themselves. They made it about God and shining His light above anything else. It matters how we respond. People are watching us, my friend. They want to see. The reason that the reason Christians are getting such a bad name is because we're out there spewing more hate. We're throwing fuel on the fire. And I'm going to be the first to tell you, let me grab a sip of water. I'm going to be the first to tell you, I teach you all the time. I don't teach from a pulpit. I teach from right in the trenches with you. One of my weaknesses is I tend to react. I'm a very reactionary person. I have to actually make myself stop for a minute, go to God, right? My life accountability partner, one of the things she says is go to the throne before you go to the phone. Go to the throne, right? I'm just going to add to that. Go to the throne before you go to social media and start spewing stuff. It matters how we respond. Sure, of course we want to stick up for Jesus. Of course that wasn't okay at the Olympics, not to mention all the other things that are done all throughout the world. We see it all every single day. Of course it's not okay. But we've got to humble ourselves, and we have to look at how we're responding. The way we respond matters. I'm not sitting here before you today and telling you that I walk this out perfectly, because I don't. But what I try to do each and every day is do better. And when I forget, and I want you to remember this, when you forget, when you react, when you don't respond in a way that shines brightly for Jesus, just stop, confess it to the Lord, ask His forgiveness, and ask Him to help you do better next time. We're not going to sit and wallow in the guilt and shame that we didn't respond well, because that's what Satan wants. Satan wants us to sit in the guilt and shame so that we're not free to further God's kingdom, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to stop right then. We're going to confess it. Lord, I am sorry. I didn't respond in a way that I should have in this. I didn't shine for you in this. Help me to do better next time. Remind me next time. Convict my heart. Do whatever it takes to remind me to come to you before I respond, right? I actually, in that moment with the opening ceremonies, my first response was I was ready to get on social media and really blast. Just talk about how this wasn't okay. But I had to take a moment. I had to take a breath. And it was a full 24 hours that I sat with God. And I told Him how I felt. Lord, I'm frustrated by this. This isn't okay. They're claiming, inclusivity, and they're not. No, we were excluded, right? And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because it doesn't matter. But I want you to understand that I don't walk this out perfectly either, that I'm still a work in progress, and that's okay. Because you know what that means? That's another opportunity for me to grow closer to God, to learn to rely on Him, to learn to go to Him and see His perspective and see how we're to respond in those situations. The way we respond matters. We have to humble ourselves. We have to foster that spirit of humility when we respond as Christians. It matters, my friend. One of the things that I taught the kids when they were growing up is before you speak, you need to ask yourself and be able to answer yes to all three before you respond. Is it kind? Is it truthful? And is it necessary? Most of the things you start asking, when you start asking that question to the way you want to respond, most of the time, you don't get a yes on all three. Most of the time, you will be forced to say, you know what? No, It's not kind. Maybe it's truthful. It's not kind, but it's truthful from what? Your perspective or God's perspective? Yeah, I know. Not easy, right? But you've got to ask yourself these things. Is it kind? Is it truthful? Is it necessary? Is my response me being prideful, being arrogant, or is my response a response of humility? A response that allows Jesus and his light to shine through. It matters, my friend. How else can you walk this out? Can you apply this in your life? Seek other Christian friends. Listen, this is what's going on. After you've had some time to go to God, to have some self-reflection, go to some of your close Christian friends. You know what I'm talking about. Those besties who you can be totally honest with, who aren't going to judge you, but who are going to sit with you in it, who are going to offer that other wisdom, godly wisdom that you need. Another way you can practice humility is by serving others. We see Jesus, right? He came not as this mighty king from like what we thought he would come as, but as a servant, right? He was the suffering servant. He came to serve and not be served. And we've got to take on that same attitude, that same servant's attitude, if we want to have a humble spirit. And finally, the way to really walk this out, the way to foster a spirit of humility is to stay connected to God. If we aren't staying connected to God, of course we're going to react. Of course we're going to go off and do things in our own flesh, right? Of course we are. We've got to stay connected to God through prayer and through getting into the Word, right? This is where, right, when we're doing these things, when we're staying connected to him through prayer and Bible study, walking in obedience, what happens is we're staying connected to him, and it makes it easier, not easy, but easier to walk this out in a way that honors him. It gives us the emotional resilience we need and the godly wisdom we need to respond to things, to walk this out without pride and arrogance, to walk out this life in a way that honors him, to fulfill that ultimate calling that he placed on us, right? So we've got to humble ourselves. We have to be humble at heart, my friend. This is hard. It takes practice. And guess what? Some days it's going to be one of those things that you're going to take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. That's totally normal. When you take that step back, just go to God and ask for that help. We've got to stay connected to God. If not, then we are never going to have a humble spirit. We won't. I'm going to put it out there very boldly. If you are not staying connected to God, there's no way for you to develop a spirit of humility. It's just not going to happen. You've got to stay connected to him, my friend. So in the coming weeks, we are going to dig into the Bible and take 3 different examples of humble servants in the Bible. We're going to really uncover what we can learn from them and how we can apply them, their examples into our own life. I am all about that. I am not about just listening to a sermon, listening to some teachings, and then close it up and go on about your day. No, if we're going to experience that transformation that we want to experience, if we truly want to step into the deep waters, we've got to learn to apply these lessons to our lives. And so we're going to do that, my friend. I got you. I'm going to take care of that. I'm going to help you with that. Now, listen, if you love these kinds of episodes where we're digging in, we're getting into the Bible, and you're like, you know what, Tammy, I love this every week. I cannot wait for the episode to come out each week, and I would love more. Then here's what I want you to do. I want you to go over to footprintsofinspiration.com/growyourfaith and join the wait list. Right now, my membership is not open. It's the Grow Your Faith community. It's not open for enrollment right now. However, the great thing is once you get on the wait list, I'll let you know when it is. But inside this membership, these are the things that we talk about. These are the things that we study each month. I put out a new lesson every month, and we just learn to walk out these lessons perfectly imperfect, take every messy step that there is, and just embrace our vulnerabilities and learn to just follow God just as we are, as the women that he created. So I want you to hop on over footprintsofinspiration.com/grow your faith. Join the wait list, because when the doors open, I want to make sure that you get into, you're one of the first ones that get into the program, because we want to make sure that we're showing up and serving you in every way possible. And my team and I love pouring into our Grow Your Faith community members. So, and by the way, big shout out to our Grow Your Faith community members. Love connecting with these women. They are absolutely incredible. So friends, listen, I can't wait to come back next week. We're going to dig into the Bible. We're going to uncover a story on humility. And then I'll see you next week for another episode of A Faithful God Podcast. Real quick before we finish up, I want to remind you to hop on over and grab your spot right now for Anchored Faith, my brand new workshop that's going to teach you the easy, practical steps you need to grow closer to God and to maintain a relationship with God in the midst of your busy, hectic, crazy days. I'm also going to teach you how to stay connected to Jesus all throughout the holidays. This workshop is only happening one time, so hop on over right now to footprintsofinspiration.com/workshop. That's footprintsofinspiration.com/workshop and grab your seat before they're gone.